Hello class, this video is on paper models and I will give a tutorial on how to go about designing and making your paper model to represent your soft good object. But first I'd like to talk about why we are making a paper model. The first reason is just sort of the design process. It's a form of thinking through your design and making it feasible. But for a visualization class, really the goal of a model is to help communicate an idea. So not only does it help you think through your idea and make it more accurate, but also having the three-dimensional model can help communicate your idea better. And this is true, for all kinds of projects, not just soft goods. Anytime you have the ability to make a mock-up, it can really help communicate to a third party what it is you're trying to do. Specifically for this third project, the goal of the paper model, as far as like the deliverables, is to design what is this flat pattern. This is going to be taken into Illustrator. This would be used to communicate with a manufacturer how to go about making your objects. Now, sometimes it's possible to show them a sketch or show them a 3D model and they will come up with their own flat pattern. But it's good to have this experience. By designing the flat pattern yourself, it kind of leaves nothing up to chance and gives a good starting point for the manufacturing of your soft good. So that's one goal, is to figure out the flat pattern of your design. The other goal is to, get this three-dimensional model, which could then be used as a photo for an underlay for the final render, for example. But because this is also sort of like a case to carry things, it can also verify that your proportion is correct, that indeed all your objects that you want to carry fit inside your case, and that it sort of works as intended. It helps you dial down your proportion. So that's the reasons why we are building a paper model. The start of my process was to have thumbnails on my design. So it's just starting with some basic concepts, maybe it's just kind of a simple fold in half, like a CD case, or maybe more of a pouch. But I kind of like this kind of like box idea for maybe like a tray. And my goal again is to design a case for sketching tools. The reason I like the idea of a tray is it kind of keeps the tools organized. If I'm designing for myself and when I'm teaching, I like to keep my utensils clearly organized so I know where to grab the colored markers when I need them, so I don't misplace them. So that's kind of where my ideation came from here. I wasn't quite sure how to go about doing a tray. At first I had some of these like complicated ideas with like folded fabric inside this larger box, but then I kind of simplified it to this relatively simple zipper down the middle double box idea that kind of when it folds open is kind of like a double tray, which is probably, not full organization, but maybe enough. The other thing that's helpful in this design process is to reference a sample, something similar to what it is you want to design, and just look at it as an example. So here I have an old pencil case of mine, and I just want to point some things out to you guys. Hopefully the lighting is clear enough that you can see some of these details. But what you should notice is that all of the stitching is on the inside of the product. You can see it looks kind of messy. It's not very attractive. By putting it on the inside, so essentially this is manufactured inside out, and then when it's done, it's flipped. And then so on the outside, you get these really nice clean seams where the fabric is tucked in on itself. It looks aesthetically pleasing. It's also structurally a little more sound. There's less opportunity for these like seams to get snagged on things on the outside and the stitching to come undone. You can kind of see it's starting to come undone on the inside. Now this is a very basic pencil case. Some more advanced soft goods will have an inside liner that completely hides all of this, so it's not visible. You also notice with the zipper, the stitching is also on the inside. And again, you can kind of see these loose tabs and edges of fabric. You never want to have a fabric edge on the outside of your design. Again, it looks messy and it gives it a chance structurally to start to kind of unravel. So in fact, this edge here of the fabric is actually folded back on itself. And when I build my paper model, I will mimic that and point it out as I do it. You can see there is a little bit of stitching on this outside here. That's a chance for a color accent, but that's sort of one stitch is putting the zipper in it. You can see this is the corresponding stitch on the inside, and it's also helping fold the material back on itself. So it's good to have a real life example with you. So I'm assuming everyone has, at the very least, some, you know, thumbnails of the design they want to do. But as far as actual materials to build your paper model, you'll need a couple. So first and foremost, of course, you'll need the objects that you intend to carry. This is good for measuring and making sure that your case indeed holds these. So if you have a wallet, make sure you have, you know, some cards on hand, your ID, maybe some cash, just to verify the fit and the proportion. Because I'm doing a pencil case or marker case, I have some markers and pencils here. Now, as far as making the physical object, it helps to have an X-Acto knife. This is a box cutter because I don't have an X-Acto blade with me. You can borrow X-Acto knives from the print lab. What I'm working on here is a cutting mat. This is so I can cut my paper without ruining the surface below. If you don't have a cutting mat, you can use a cardboard box, or again, you can borrow small cutting mats from the print lab. Also, you can borrow from the print lab is a metal ruler. Make sure it's metal, not plastic, so that when you're cutting your paper model, the blade and the metal work well together. If it's plastic, the blade might cut into the plastic. A note on these knives, they're very sharp. The most common design injury is cutting yourself with one of these blades. Please don't do that. The way I feel like it tends to happen is your finger's over here, your blade's coming down, and then suddenly you go into your finger, or maybe the knife slips. You know, try and cut away from yourself when you can. I tend to try and have my cuts going, you know, left to right, so, and you know, try not to pull it directly towards me. It's going to be really handy for this project if you have double-sided tape. Now, you can get away without it for sure. I think the print lab also has double-sided tape you can borrow. But if not, you can just use good old regular Scotch tape. That'll work too. And of course, you will need some paper. So these are kind of like the bare minimum materials you'll need. The paper doesn't need to be anything fancy. It's the same stuff we sketch on, just regular printer paper. If you can get your hands on some 11 by 17, it might make your life a little bit easier. I'm going to be working on my models at full scale. That means a 1-to-1 ratio. Whatever the model I build is the size it's going to be. If you want, you can build at a half or quarter scale. It's just going to make your life a little bit harder and require a bit more math for you. So with that said, I can jump right in here to making my model. So again, the question is like, okay, what's the starting point? Well, as I already mentioned, the starting point is having some thumbnails to work off of. This is the design that I'm happy with, so I'm trying to make a box essentially. There is going to be a bit of trial and error with this project. I will tell you now, this was my first model I made. It was too big. I can see with my markers and pencil in here, it's too much room. I made some notes. It's helpful to have notes as you're working on this, you know, adjusting the size as you're going and as you make a model. So there's a chance you'll be building more than one model. You can, of course, build one and make notes and adjust the flat pattern in your design to represent the changes as opposed to building a second paper model. But, you know, part of the grading on this is on proportion and scale. If I feel that it's off and you only built one model, then I'm going to feel like, you know, you didn't do your full exploration. If you do like 2 models, one test and then another one to change the size, and maybe it's still off, I'll probably be a little bit more forgiving on your grade because at least you did a little bit deeper exploration. So, you know, judge that on your own. And of course, we can talk about that on Wednesday. So let me talk about how I went about building this. So again, that's my starting point and what I'm trying to build. So I'm going to keep my tools off to the side here, my carry objects, just to verify occasionally. I'm going to use a pencil, and I encourage everyone to start this way. Really to figure out, by drawing first, roughly where you want your cuts and folds to be. So if these are the objects that I want to carry, I can take a quick measurement of them, you know, laid out. They're about 2.5 inches wide. The pencil's about 7 inches long. It's the longest object. So that's roughly like what I'm trying to start at. 2.5 by 7. And again, the first one I made was a bit bigger. So there is some trial and error. So my first step is to find the center of my page here. Just like trick from Des 140, I can draw an X on the center. And this is so that I'll start with the base of my box. And again, everyone's process might be different. If you're doing a wallet, you know, you might be laying out the cash and making sure you have a pocket big enough for some cash. maybe you have a unique goal in mind. The nice thing with these cutting mats is if you align the edge of the paper with the squares, you can take 90-degree measurements and keep your initial drawing, relationship of 90 degrees to each other in line, essentially. The term for that is square. You're keeping it square to itself. So I have the center of my page. Now I'm going to, again, I want my object to be the base of my object to be about 7 inches long. So I'm going to mark 7 inches on this page. Again, trying to keep it aligned here. And I'm doing 7 inches where it intersects with this X, again, to keep this base as centered as possible. But of course I'm going to change the width. This is telling me what the width is right now. But I want to determine the width myself. I don't want the X to determine the width of my base. Again, this is just setting me up so that I'm working center on the page so that I don't run out of paper. So I'll do the same thing on this side, again using this to keep me 90 degrees, looking at roughly where this intersects. There's always some adjustments to be made later on. So this is just my starting point. I can double check here and just make sure that I'm square as I connect these two intersection points with the vertical lines and the X's. It's up to you how fussy to be with accuracy. It does pay off, I think, in the long run when you start to fold the model together. You may be asking, like, how do you even know, like, where to start or where the folds are and stuff? Again, it's trial and error. You may, like, really, you just need to jump in on it using real life examples as reference on how it might be folded together, and then just kind of jumping in and making adjustments as you go is kind of the process here. All right, so this square represents a rough center base, but like I said, it's too wide. I don't want it to be that wide. I want it to be about, if I have these in here, like I said, maybe about 2.5 inches. And again, this is from my trial and error from before. So using my center line here, if it's 2.5 inches wide, if I mark 1.25 inches, I can get the width and then just verify that this is still 1.25 inches, that my math is right. And I can do the same on this side here, 1.25 inches and 2.5. And then again, just double check that this is also 1.25 inches. So now with these hash marks down, again, if I want to be diligent, I can align my paper with an edge here to keep everything square. And just verify. I think everything looks pretty good. So bring this all the way across. It helps to draw all your lines all the way through, and you'll see why in a minute. And again here, all the way through. All right, so now this represents my base, this rectangle here. And again, just occasionally grabbing my objects to double check the fit and how it works. Now this is just the starting point. If this is the base, these parts will all be folds. It helps maybe to mark these folds off the bat. I'm gonna take a pen here, so maybe my blue pencil is used for the underlay, but I represent folds with dotted lines or dashed lines and cuts with solid lines. Whatever you do, just be consistent with your mark making. Again, it's all about communicating. When it comes to making your tech pack and your flat pattern, you can kind of have a key. And we'll go over your flat patterns on Wednesday when I'm back in class. But these are kind of, I'm just marking out my folds so that I don't forget that this is my base, and all of these tabs are folded up to kind of make my paper, my paper tray that eventually will be a soft goods tray. If this were being made, but for this class, we're just doing paper, and then a sketch. All right, so now that I have that figured out, the next thing I want to figure out is how high I want these walls to be. Now I conveniently kind of have this box drawn, so I could maybe take this measurement and say, okay, what is this? All right, it's about 1.5 inches. You know, if I measure what's the thickest thing, maybe if it's like 2 markers high, how thick is that? Yeah, about 1 inch, holds about 2 markers. So ideally I'd want my walls to be 1 inch high, so I'm gonna mark this here. But now, like I said before, you never want a raw edge on the outside. I learned that from my first model here. There's this paper thin edge. And if I look at my reference, again, the edge of the fabric is on the inside. It's actually folded back on itself. So we want to make sure that we have a little extra material to fold back on and make a tab on the top here. And you know what, because this is 1 inch and this is just a little bit longer, 1/2 inch feels about right to me for a tab. So I'm just gonna go and double check all of my measurements. That's 1 inch. It's a bit tall, maybe this is a bit better down here. And this here, this is gonna represent my tab. So I'm gonna make it as a dotted line, because again, it's gonna fold back on itself and then be stitched together when the zipper comes through. So that's what that represents. And then I would do the same on this side, but for trying to keep this video as short as possible, I'm just gonna work in this top left corner. So if this is 1 inch tall, we wanna make sure that this wall is also 1 inch tall, but we also want a tab. So maybe with a 1/2 inch tab, we're gonna measure 1.5 inches here, and then mark a 1/2 inch here. Same thing, 1.5 inches here, and then mark a 1/2 inch tab. So the tab, so where we cut, I'm gonna mark with a straight line, and where we fold, I'm gonna mark with a dotted line, or a dashed line rather. So again, this should be equal and this should roughly be equal. Now we also know from our example that the stitching is on the inside and it's folded, tabs are folded in on themselves and stitched to form this seam and get this nice clean looking edge on the outside. So we're gonna do the same thing here. So if we're going for about a 1/2 inch tab, I can start to measure the same thing in here. Really those those tabs on the physical model are about 1/4 inch. But I encourage all of you to use 1/2 inch tabs. It's just gonna make your life a little bit easier to work with. You can make those adjustments on the computer later. For what it's worth too, mentioning the computer, you can do this, what I'm doing now, on the computer if you'd like. I think no matter what, you're gonna have to start with a physical model that you start to kind of explore and cut together. But once you have a general idea, if you're trying to make a final flat pattern to make into your final model, definitely consider jumping on the computer. It might make your life easier. So these are my 2 tabs here. Now, of course, the paper can't, and fabric can't double up here. So this would just probably be a 45-degree cut in this corner, like that. And now, just like we marked all of our folds, these tabs are gonna be just folded on themselves. So I'm gonna take my pen again to go over my blue pencil and just make these dashed lines for clarity. Now again, that's roughly the starting point, or this is the starting point of my paper tray that's eventually gonna be a soft goods tray. I would do what I just did in this corner. I would go around and do it on all these other sides too. The best way to do this, if you're working, is to just draw all these lines all the way through. So when you draw this tab, just come all the way through. You're gonna start to mark out this tab here. You can draw all the way through on this one and mark out this tab here. But again, for the sake of time and keeping this video as short as possible, I did this like I have my pre-made paper model here. Sorry about that, bumped the camera a bit. So again, what I did here, I translated all the way around on this page. And then I just went over with ink to make it a little more clear. As far as documenting your process, when you're at this stage, be sure to grab a photo of this, because this is what you're gonna trace in Illustrator to get your flat pattern. You'll notice some things here, like this adjustment. This is when I went through at the end and just double checked all my measurement. I noticed that's a little bit off here. When I cut this out, I'll probably discover that I'm off in other ways, and there's ways, we can make adjustments as we go with these things. So once you have your flat pattern figured out and your photo taken, you can then get your ruler and knife out and start to cut your paper model out. Now again, please be careful when you're using your knife, and just be aware with what you're cutting, and please don't hurt yourselves. Again, you could get away with scissors if you wanted to do it that way, but I discourage it. The scissors tend to not cut straight. These make nice long straight cuts and kind of keep you headed in the right direction. So I'm just cutting all the longest lines on the outside. These scraps might be useful later if I want to make like represent a zipper, or represent maybe some elastic to hold my tools in place. When it comes to like all these little cuts, it is possible to work without the ruler. But for now, I'm just going to stick with it. Now, I will say I kind of got my orders of operation just a little bit wrong here. It is actually helpful to make some of these folds before you fully cut everything out, because sometimes folding thin pieces of paper can be really hard. It's probably not too late to do it now. So this is where I get my ruler back out. This is when it's really nice to have the dotted lines, because it can get, you can go a bit cross-eyed with all these lines on your model. If you have these dotted lines, you'll know where to make the folds. And again, it's helpful to make the folds all at once and kind of do it, folding big pieces of paper. If you're trying to fold these tabs one at a time, at a 1/2 inch it should be okay, but you'll see it here now when I fold this long one. It would have been easier for me to fold this tab when I had this full sheet here with me. But it's still doable. Now there is a final check before we start taping everything together. That's just, if we break this out into steps, step 1 is like plotting the size and drawing the flat pattern, with your objects on hand. Step 2 is starting to cut out the pattern. Step 2 would be making the folds. Step 3 would be cutting the pattern. Again, I kind of did that a bit out of order here. Those are somewhat interchangeable. It's just easier to fold first. Then step 4 would technically be checking that everything aligns, and step 5 would be taping. And I'll put that in the email that I sent you guys with this. So now you can see everything's cut. I'm just finalizing these folds. So again, these tabs, this is so that when this is the top of your model, it's a nice folded edge. It's not this kind of like ragged raw edge here. And again, that is a principle of good soft goods design. And that's why we encourage, or that's why building a paper model is a requirement for this project, is to learn some of those things and to understand them 3-dimensionally. So the final check I'm going to do here, that I'm calling step 4, is just verifying that everything fits up well. Because I was very careful with my measuring, you can see all these walls align. If one of these walls was taller, which tended to happen with some of these first models that I built, you can always like change where this fold is. You can always cut a bit more. So there is a good chance that at this stage you are going to have to make adjustments to your model before you tape it together. So let's just hypothetically say that this wall was taller than this one. It is ever so slightly. You could see where it aligns here. You fold it up into 3 dimensions, and you can just kind of mark where to cut it. And then you could lay this back out and either change where your fold is or cut it. If I want to cut this just a little bit shorter, I could. The other nice, you can see the paper, there's a little bit of a tear there. You can use a ruler to hold down your paper when you cut, if you need to take small tabs off. That was really fussy. You don't have to be that fussy. I just wanted to show you how you might make an adjustment. All right, now with everything basically ready to go, this is when the double-sided tape comes in handy. Again, you could use regular tape, but double-sided tape will lead to a slightly cleaner model. So when you document your process and you have final photos, it might look a little bit better if you have double-sided tape. But again, you can get away with Scotch tape to tape this down. Check the print lab. They should have some double-sided tape. If you have any issues, I guess, getting some of these stuff from the print lab, let me know. But they should be able to help you guys out. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to fold all of these exterior tabs down. I'm just putting 3 pieces of tape on these long faces, 1 at each corner and 1 in the center. Now it's helpful to put all the tape on first and then fold the tab. And again, just working my way all the way around on this model. Sorry, I get kind of close to the edge of the screen there. On these shorter tabs, I can get away with just 1 piece of tape per corner. Again, in real life, these tabs would probably be about a 1/4 inch, not a 1/2 inch. It's just easier with your paper model to work at a 1/2 inch. So fold these down. If you accidentally fold, you could maybe use your knife to kind of help pry the paper up. Just be really gentle. Try not to tear your model if you can avoid that. And now that I have all my nice clean edges, now it's just a matter of putting these tabs together. So I can drop a piece of tape on here. Probably should have made that piece of tape smaller, but again, it's all right. We're just getting it close. Now this would all represent stitching, right? That's what the tape is representing, is where the stitches might be. And again, this will help with your drawing of your model. So with all these outside edges, we probably see some stitching along here. This inside edge, you probably wouldn't see stitching because it's on this inner tab. You know, I'm making these pieces of tape too long. I'm just gonna cut it in half. It doesn't need to be that big. And there you have it. There is my paper tray that one day may be made out of a soft, fabric. I can verify the fit of my items. It feels to be about a good size. If I wanted to add a little bit more realism, I might run a zipper around this outer edge. That will also be helpful for the flat view. Now, here's again where a reference is handy. I can look at the inside here, look at the thickness of this zipper. I can see it's about a 1/2 inch. I can use one of my scraps here, measure about a 1/2 inch on this side, keep it square to the cutting mat, drop my ruler on here, and cut this. If you want to get really fancy, maybe this could be a different color piece of paper so that you can kind of color code your model. I don't expect that though, so I'm just going to draw teeth on here just so I know it's a zipper. And again, it's all about communicating. If I was sending this, somewhere to be manufactured, I could take a photo. Things like this help communicate what my intent is. I know that this is about 11 inches long. Because it's an 11 inch by 8.5 piece of paper. So this is going to give me the length of my zipper for my flat pattern in my drawing. So I can put that piece of tape on there, start to fold this around. I can see how short I am. You can see I'm about an inch short from the edge. So now when I do my flat pattern, I'm going to know that my zipper needs to be 12 inches long for this. And again, it's going to be helpful to make a note for your tech pack when it comes to manufacturing this. Other things I can start to explore is like, okay, if I want this to be 2 trays, again, going back to my concept here, my thumbnail referencing this, if I want this to open up and have 2 trays of utensils, I probably need some sort of like elastic snap to kind of keep all of my drawing utensils down. So that's also what the paper model is useful for, is figuring out some of these smaller details. So for example, what's the length of that strap? I can kind of roughly, you know, I know it's roughly about this long. You know, maybe it is an inch of elastic. Verify the fit. Feels pretty good. Again, I can draw, you can draw on your paper model, so maybe there'd be some stitching here. Put a piece of double-sided tape behind there. And that would maybe go to the inside. So again, if you see some stitching in here, you would see some stitching out here. And again, that helps for the realism. When I draw this final sketch, I'll know to put an X there. And now this, how does it detach in here? Maybe it's a snap. Again, we went over this in the last video, the different kinds of tools that there are. So maybe I want this to be a snap. I can represent it with a circle. I can make a note for myself that, hey, there's maybe going to be a snap here. And then this kind of helps my design intent. Maybe this is a form of branding on the outside. If it's a custom snap, maybe I can get like a logo on there or something. This can snap down. So this, by doing this exercise of this paper model, it really adds realism to the design and helps communicate it. Because I have this earlier one made, you know, this is where the other half might go. Just gonna drop a piece of double-sided tape in here to kind of stick my snap to. But ideally, you know, this is my starting point. So really actually, and I'm limited by the size of the paper, but my 8.5 by 11, really these might be attached. So instead of this as a stitch folding back on itself, these might be connected. So the paper model gets you started, and then you can use some of this information for making a more accurate flat pattern. So, you know, to do this properly, again, I would probably say that these 2 pieces of fabric would be connected by a bridge here. And again, the zipper only goes around that one side. This would be attached. Based on the way that I have it, I can use some Scotch tape now as another way to do this if I don't feel like, you know, making it a 4th time. And again, that's it. I mean, the bare minimum, guys, is to make this model once, but that means that you figured all your problems out in one build, which is very possible. And if you did and it looks good, more power to you. You'll get a good grade. If it didn't quite work out, oops, I taped this wrong, then chances are, you know, I'm going to be a little bit more, I'm going to be less forgiving if you only build one model and it doesn't quite turn out for you. Again, I had to build, until I got this dimension, I had to build 2 essentially. Oops, I got tape stuck to tape here. Let's try and align this a little bit better. There we go. And yeah, again, tape can be used to represent a hinge. And now I can compare, you know, my concept here to my model. Does it look about the same? I can get an idea of what it looks like. I can have some realism. I know, again, that I'm going to have 2 stitches on the outside here. Maybe that tells me that's a good opportunity to put a loop. So this is, again, all these design considerations start to come together and help add a little bit of realism to what you're doing. I highly encourage that as you work, you take notes. So again, this is the base that I have. Here's the zipper. Again, I know I'm about an inch short, and it's 11 inches to begin with, so I know it's a 12-inch zipper. So just take notes as you go. Hopefully this tutorial was clear. Again, it's gonna be different for all of you based on what you're doing. Some more simple, hopefully not too much more complex than this. I would say a wallet is probably the most simple thing you can do. But yeah, let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Thanks.